If you plan on applying for citizenship this year, you need to pay attention to this video because USCIS has made some policy changes when it comes to the good moral character requirement. It is no longer the case that all you have to do is not have a criminal record and then you'll be able to prove good moral character. They have expanded what they look at for good moral character, which will make it harder for certain people to be able to get citizenship. That's, of course, their goal. So in this video, I'll be breaking down what these new policy changes are and how you can still get your citizenship regardless of what they're talking about. I'm U.S. Immigration Attorney Lilian Chukwurah, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the U.S. immigration law system. So, like we're gonna start doing with all these policy changes, we're gonna actually look at what the policy says and then talk about what you can do to still protect yourself. On August 15th, USCIS put out this new policy memorandum, basically all about good moral character and how officers are going to be evaluating good moral character moving forward. We know that every single citizenship application, naturalization application has a good moral character clause, meaning the officer has to find that you have good moral character. This is saying that their whole purpose for doing this is to basically make the good moral character clause not just something that officers look at to see if this person didn't do anything wrong, but also to make sure that the officer is looking for the favorable factors, right? Not just, did this person commit a crime? No, okay, they get citizenship. They want more than that. They want the person to show good moral character, especially, this is the part, in relevant part, as far as the purpose of this thing, they're saying evaluating good moral character, GMC, involves more than a cursory mechanical review focused on the absence of wrongdoing. It entails a holistic assessment of an alien's behavior, adherence to societal norms, and positive contributions that affirmatively demonstrate good moral character. They're basically saying when an officer is looking at whether someone has good moral character, they cannot just look at whether the person never committed a crime or did something wrong, but they also now have to look at whether the person has added something to their life in the US, right? What have they done? Have they adhered to societal norms? Again, what does that mean? We would not know, right? What does it actually mean to adhere to societal norms? What does it mean to positively contribute? We do not know, right? The officers will need to make those determinations. So they're basically saying there is legal framework for this. So they talk about what has happened in the past with the statutory changes, meaning the changes in the laws. Now they're talking about the current legal framework. And they're basically saying the good moral character standard is naturalization is envisioned not simply as a procedural immigration benefit, the greatest of all, but a significant legal transformation, an assimilation to a country that demands both allegiance and character. A step towards naturalization is determining whether an alien has met the requirement of demonstrating good moral character. Section 316A3 requires that an alien applying for naturalization has been and still is a person of good moral character during the statutory period. Now, just pause to let you know, the statutory period is either 3 years if you're filing based on marriage or 5 years if you're doing the general provision filing. USCIS determines whether an alien has met the good moral character requirement on a case-by-case basis. The standard of proof for all naturalization decisions, including good moral character, is preponderance of the evidence. This means the alien must show it is more likely than not that they have met all the requirements for naturalization. Okay, so as far as good moral character is involved, the person has to show that they are more likely than not to have good moral character. Okay, so it's more likely that they have good moral character than they don't have good moral character. That's the requirement. It's not like beyond a reasonable doubt that you have a good moral character. It's really, is it more likely that you have good moral character than not? The regulations and policy affirm that good moral character findings must go beyond the absence of disqualifying acts. It must reflect a genuine positive assessment of who the alien is and how they have lived in their community. Thus, good moral character has generally meant a character commensurate with the standard of average citizens of the community in which the alien resides. Remember that line. Thus, good moral character has generally meant a character commensurate with the standards of average citizens of the community in which the alien resides. Okay? That's what they're saying. Furthermore, then they talk about case law and how, multiple DUIs undermines good moral character unless it's rebutted by affirmative evidence of reform. So just because there's evidence that you may not have good moral character does not mean that's where it stops. You may have positive evidence of your good moral character, so you can use that positive evidence to counteract the negative. Okay? So basically, the officer is going to look at the totality of the circumstances. So now, going forward, USCIS officers must account for an alien's positive attributes and not simply the absence of misconduct. In evaluating whether or not an alien has met the requirement of establishing good moral character, the officer must take a holistic approach in evaluating whether or not an alien seeking naturalization has affirmatively established that he or she has met their burden of establishing that they are worthy of assuming the rights and responsibilities of United States citizenship. Wow. Right. So basically, they're saying there's going to be a greater emphasis on positive attributes and contributions. So you're not just going to be like, I've never committed any crimes. I've never, had any of these things that's negative. You may now also have to show positive factors. And they've given examples of what these positive factors could be, which includes sustained community involvement and contributions in the U.S., family caregiving responsibility and ties in the United States, educational attainment, stable and lawful employment history and achievements, length of lawful permanent residency in the United States, and then compliance with tax obligations and financial responsibility in the U.S. So they're basically saying, they're looking at your whole life, right? They're looking at how involved are you in your community? Are you taking care of your children? Are you taking care of your family? Are you a responsible person, right? Are you well educated? How much education do you have? Are you stable in your employment, or are you jumping from one job to another? They're going to be looking at how long you've been a permanent resident, and then of course, whether you have complied with your tax and financial responsibilities. So are you filing your taxes? Are you paying your taxes? All of those things, they are now going to consider a positive factor. Right? And then there's going to be greater scrutiny of disqualifying behavior and action. USCIS will focus greater attention on whether an alien has engaged in any behavior or act that disqualifies the alien from being found to be a person of good moral character. So let's talk about what these disqualifying behaviors are. So there's permanent bars to good moral character. So if you don't know this, when it comes to good moral character, you can show good moral character in some situations, and then there's certain situations that you are never ever going to be able to show good moral character. And these are the permanent bars to good moral character. So murder, aggravated felony, crimes of violence, persecution of others, genocide, torture, and severe violations of religious freedoms are going to make you permanently not have good moral character. Next is the conditional bars to good moral character, such as controlled substances violations, 2 or more convictions for driving under the influence, false claim of U.S. citizenship, unlawful voter registration, or unlawful voting. Okay, these are conditional bars because in some situations you may be able to overcome the bar. Okay, in some situations you may be able to overcome the bar, and then in other situations you will not be able to. So it's really important that if you have any of these things, especially a controlled substance violation, the false claim of U.S. citizenship, there's really when it comes to false claim of U.S. citizenship, there's very narrow exception. And unlawful voter registration and unlawful voting also tie into false claim of citizenship, because in most places, in order for you to register to vote and then for you to vote, you have to be a U.S. citizen. So those 3 things can be tied in together. And then any other acts, so after you pass the permanent bar to good moral character and you pass the conditional bar to good moral character, the officer also have to look at any other acts that are contrary to the average behavior of citizens in the jurisdiction where aliens reside. These could be actions that, while technically lawful, may be inconsistent with civic responsibility within the community, such as reckless or habitual traffic infractions or harassment or aggressive solicitation. Okay, so even though the action itself is legal, if it is inconsistent with civic responsibility within the community, you can still be found to not have good moral character. Now, who gets to decide this? The officer gets to decide whether this is within the civic responsibilities, right? So it is giving us some clues, but it is not giving us enough information to know how this will actually play out in real life. All right. So basically it says here, in assessing acts that are unlawful or contrary to the average behavior of citizens of a community in which the alien resides, USCIS will review all available documentation and question aliens seeking naturalization regarding the specific circumstances of their actions to determine if a particular situation or act could bar an alien from naturalization. So, how will they figure out if it's inconsistent with civic responsibilities? They would question the alien. They will question the person applying for naturalization. They will look at relevant documentation, whatever that is, and then make a decision. So it's basically up to the officer to determine whether the person should get citizenship or not. Now, there is rehabilitation and reformation. So USCIS will also focus greater attention on ensuring that aliens who have engaged in wrongdoing are properly rehabilitated and reformed. Consistent with the totality of circumstances approach, evidence of genuine rehabilitation may support a finding of good moral character. This includes, but is not limited to, rectifying overdue child support payments or other family obligations, compliance with probation and other conditions imposed by a court, community testimony from credible sources attesting to the alien's good moral character, reformation or mentoring those with similar pasts, full repayment of overpayment of benefits such as SSI, full payment of overdue taxes. So these are ways that you can reform and rehabilitate your good moral character. Again, like I said before, there's the permanent bars to good moral character, and then there's the conditional bars to good moral character, and then there's everything else in between that the officer can basically see as you violating good moral character. So basically, we have to look at the full picture now. So just because you don't have any criminal records does not mean that you have good moral character. That's what this is saying. right? Just because you don't have those permanent or conditional bars to good moral character does not mean that the officer is automatically going to find that you have good moral character. So you may want to have other things ready to go to show your good moral character. Now, do I expect there to be major shifts in the way the officers make these decisions? Probably not major shifts, but they are going to ask you more questions about traffic violations, right? Speeding tickets, things that before they wouldn't really focus on, they may focus more on it now. Because if you get like a speeding ticket every single week, they may now say that that is contrary to your civic responsibility within the community, and therefore you should not be able to get your naturalization because you do not have good moral character, right? So we need to look at that whole thread, because it is not just that the person does not have a DUI, or that you do not have any false claims of citizenship, or you do not have any controlled substance violations. Even if you do not have those things, even if you do not have a murder conviction, but if you have an open case that is not resolved yet, you may also have a good moral character issue. If you are on probation and you have not completed your probation, you may have a good moral character issue. However, if you have one of these things, let's say you have a DUI that they can see as, contrary to civic responsibility, but you have completed whatever program or probation that you had to do for that charge, when you go and apply for citizenship, the officer can look at the fact that you successfully completed the program, successfully completed the probation, as a positive thing. So do not think that you would not be able to prove good moral character. It's going to take more for you to prove good moral character, but it is not impossible. One thing I do want to flag here, when it comes to rehabilitation, they said full payment of overdue taxes, not you have a payment plan. So before this memo, if you owed taxes to the IRS and they have sent you documentation and you get into a payment plan with the IRS and you're making payments towards that tax due amount based on your payment plan, USCIS offices typically will see that as rehabilitation. You're taking steps to pay what you owe. Now, this is saying that it's full payment of overdue taxes that does the rehabilitation, not even being on a payment plan. Now, could the officer still consider you being on a payment plan as rehabilitation? Absolutely. But it is up to the officer when there's no full repayment to say, is this actually rehabilitation? When this memo is basically saying full repayment is the rehabilitation, okay? And then for people with child support obligations, if you have past due child support obligations, just know that is still going to be an issue. And the only way to rectify it is to pay the overdue payments, or to enter into, in this situation, dependent, you may be able to get away with having an agreement with the Department of Revenue, or however you're making the payments, or through the family court. That makes it so that you are able to pay your past due child support obligations, and maybe the officer will see that as rehabilitation, since this does not specifically say full payment of the overdue child support payments. However, I would not risk it, okay? You want to make sure that you have that in writing and you have documentation showing that you are up to date, or at least in the process of being up to date with your child support obligations. Okay. Another thing, because they said other family obligations here, this is making me think that if, let's say, for example, you have custody agreements and you are not meeting your agreement. So for example, if you have visitation with your children and they're supposed to be with you every other weekend, but you have missed the last 10 weekends, and your children's other parent files a court case basically saying, hey, you haven't been picking up these children, you haven't been meeting your obligations. If USCIS officers go and find that, that can also cause you to not have good moral character. So it is not just whether you owe taxes, whether you owe child support. You may want to also make sure that you are meeting your obligations as part of any custody orders, and that there's no modifications or contempt. Okay? You really want to make sure that you are following whatever court order is in place if there is a child support and a child custody agreement or order. So this is going to be a bigger deal. However, it is not something that's like impossible to overcome. It just means you're going to have to do more work on the front end. So when you're thinking about your citizenship application, when you're thinking about taking those steps to finally get your citizenship, you need to really think about what it's going to take for you to be able, right? What is it going to take for you to be able to get your citizenship based on your specific situation? We can't look at anyone else's situation anymore. It is not generalized anymore. So we would have to look at if you have any criminal history, if you have any public records that is negative, right? Because USCIS is going to be basing their stuff on public information that they have access to, right? So is there any court records that we need to be aware of, whether it's civil, right? Do you have a bunch of small claims against you? Those may also come and be a problem for good moral character. Remember, their basis for this category for good moral character is your behavior, even though it's lawful, inconsistent with civic responsibility within the community. And the officer gets to decide what that is, right? Based on the information they have access to and any thing you tell them during your interview. So really important that we know what's going on, know that this is going to try to make it harder for more people to be able to get citizenship. However, that does not mean you should not apply for citizenship. It just means that you need to be aware of your full picture before you take any steps towards applying for citizenship. If you have found this video helpful so far, please make sure to like and share this video. Now we're going to look at the conditional bars to good moral character, because there's so much more to it, and the policy manual tells us what these conditional bars are. So I want to make sure that we cover them. So there's the offenses, and then there's the description. And what I like about looking at it this way, and not just looking at the offense, but looking at the description, is that sometimes there are exceptions to them, and you wouldn't know it until you look at it. All right, so first one is one or more crimes involving moral turpitude. This requires a conviction or admission of one or more CIMTs, except for one petty offense, okay? If you have one petty offense, they will let it go, but anything else, you're in trouble. Aggregate sentence of 5 years or more. So if you have a conviction of 2 or more offenses with combined sentence of 5 years or more. So it's not just one conviction, it's 2 or more offenses, okay? Controlled substance violation, if then the description says violation of any law on controlled substances except for simple possession of 30 grams or less of marijuana, okay? Incarceration for 180 days, incarceration for a total period of 180 days or more, except political offenses, and ensuing confinement abroad. Okay. False testimony under oath false testimony for the purpose of obtaining any immigration benefits. So it's really important to look at the description, because you may see this and think immediately like criminal law or something like that. No, this is specifically false testimony for the purpose of obtaining any immigration benefits. So misrepresentation is a bar. Prostitution offenses: engaged in prostitution, attempted or procured to import prostitution, or received proceeds from prostitution. Smuggling of a person: involved in smuggling of a person to enter or try to enter the U.S. in violation of law. Polygamy: practice or is practicing polygamy, the custom of having more than one spouse at the same time. You're in trouble, honey. Gambling offenses: two or more gambling offenses, or derives income principally from illegal gambling activities. Listen, going to a casino, right? So you go to Vegas, you go to the MGM, and you go and play poker at the MGM is not what they're talking about. Okay, this is not illegal gambling. So that's not what they're talking about here. They're talking about specifically illegal gambling, not the legal stuff, okay? Habitual drunkard: so is or was a habitual drunkard. So again, even if you're not anymore, you may still be having an issue here. Two or more convictions for driving under the influence during the statutory period. Okay, so let's say 3 or 5 years. If within that 3 or 5 years you have 2 or more convictions for driving under the influence, you don't have good moral character unless you can give a lot of evidence that counters that. You're not getting your citizenship. Failure to support dependents, right? Willful failure or refusal to support dependents unless extenuating circumstances are established. So, for example, what would be an extenuating circumstance is if the person is hurt medically and they are not able to work, so therefore they do not have income to pay their support obligations. That would be extenuating circumstances. But if it's just that you did not apply for a job, so you do not have a job, so therefore you can't take care of your kids, no, that's not it. Adultery: extramarital affairs intending to destroy existing marriage unless extenuating circumstances are established. Okay, so important. We don't think about this when we think about good moral character, but this is included under the good moral character, the conditional bars. So adultery is included. Please. So extramarital affair tending to destroy existing marriage. Now, if it's not intended to destroy the existing marriage, then you may be fine. So for example, if you're married but you are in a polyamorous relationship and the goal is not to destroy your existing marriage, then you may be fine, right? Even though it may be seen as an extramarital affair, because of the circumstances, you may still be able to prove good moral character. Now you have to talk to the officer about your situation, but that would be one of the cases where I think you would be fine if it is a true polyamorous relationship. Not polygamous, okay? Not polygamous. You're not married to more than one person. Polyamorous relationship would be a way to overcome adultery, in my opinion. Unlawful acts. So unlawful acts that adversely reflect upon good moral character unless extenuating circumstances are established. So those are the conditional bars. This page goes into more detail. Remember, the policy manual is for the officers. This is what they're looking at to determine if the person has a conditional bar. They're going to give the officers more detail. So if you want me to go into these details, the crimes involving moral turpitude, the aggregate sentence, the controlled substance violations, what actually counts, especially when like your state law has decriminalized marijuana, Can it still be used against you? Simple possession exception, all of this stuff. False testimony, there's three elements to false testimony. We can go into that if you would like. Let me know in the comments if you want me to actually go through these one at a time and get into more detail. But I wanted to let you guys know exactly what these conditional bars to good moral character is, because the permanent bars to good moral character is very clear, but the conditional bars not so much. So I wanted to make sure we talked about that. So let me know in the comments, what do you think about this new update on the policy manual about the good moral character? Do you think this is a positive thing moving forward, or do you think this is going to make it harder for people to be able to apply for citizenship? If you're in a position where you're a green card holder and you are thinking about applying for citizenship and you're not sure if this is the right time to do it, what your chances are, what you need to do to prepare for citizenship, well, go ahead and schedule a strategy session with me. Let's talk about your situation, see what you qualify for, see if there's some negative factors to good moral character in your situation and how we can overcome them. If you would like to schedule that strategy session, please go to my website, lilylegal.com. Click on Contact Us, and you can pick a date and time that works best for you for us to chat about your case. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.